The rain drummed against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the empty spaces of my apartment. Outside, Brooklyn was drenched in winter's unforgiving cold, the kind that sank into your bones and made you crave warmth, solitude. I had wrapped myself tightly in a thick knit blanket, curled up on the worn-out couch that had become a refuge on nights like this. A cup of tea sat forgotten on the coffee table, its steam long faded, much like my resolve to do anything productive that evening. The soft glow of my lamp stretched long shadows across the walls, giving the room a quiet, intimate stillness. I told myself I liked it this way, that I preferred it, but loneliness had a way of whispering the truth in the silence. It wasn't that I hated being alone. I had built the life around it after all. But there was a difference between choosing solitude and feeling the weight of it settle over you, uninvited and heavy. The latter had crept in sometime between the hum of the radiator and the echo of rain outside. I tried to ignore it, sinking deeper into the couch, pulling the blanket higher as if it could shield me from the strange unrest pooling in my chest. And then, the vibration of my phone shattered the quiet. I blinked, my body jolting slightly at the unexpected sound. The screen lit up beside me, casting a pale glow over the dim room. I hesitated before picking it up, a strange sense of anticipation already curling in my stomach before I even saw the name.
Anna.
I exhaled, slow and measured, but it did nothing to calm the sudden, erratic pulse beneath my skin. I'm downstairs. 2 simple words. No explanation. No preamble. But they carried the weight of something inevitable. I glanced at the time. 11:54 p.m. Almost midnight.
She shouldn't be here.
But then again, when had Anna ever cared about should or shouldn't? She had been like this since the day we met at the publishing house, crossing lines with an ease that was both infuriating and intoxicating. There was a way about her, a quiet confidence that turned every interaction into something charged, something unpredictable. The way she spoke, like she was weaving a story she hadn't quite decided the ending to. The way she watched me, as if she already knew the choices I would make before I did. I should have ignored the message. I should have left it unread, let the rain drown out the sound of her presence in my life. But I knew myself too well, and Anna knew me even better. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I pushed the blanket aside and stood. The hardwood floor was cold beneath my bare feet, sending a sharp contrast through my body as I crossed the room. My fingers hesitated on the curtain before I pulled it back, peering through the rain-speckled glass. And there she was, standing beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, wrapped in a heavy black coat, her posture relaxed in that effortless way that only she could manage. Her blonde hair, still damp from the misting rain, was twisted into a messy bun, loose strands framing her sharp, knowing features. A cigarette dangled between her fingers, unlit, forgotten. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't impatiently checking if I had read the message. No, she simply stood there, waiting for me to decide. My heart lurched in a way that was unfamiliar, unsettling. The logical part of me screamed to turn away, to let this moment pass, to preserve whatever fragile distance still remained between us. But the truth was, if I didn't open that door tonight, I would spend every hour until morning wondering what would have happened if I had. So I opened it. When Anna stepped into my apartment, she brought the scent of rain with her, fresh and cool, laced with something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. It clung to her skin, her clothes, the damp strands of hair escaping from her loosely pinned bun. But it wasn't just the rain. There was something else, something unspoken, pressing in like a weight between us, thickening the air, making the room feel smaller than it had just seconds before. She moved with the kind of ease that made it impossible to tell if she was comfortable or simply confident enough to make it seem that way. Without hesitation, she slipped off her heavy black coat and tossed it onto the back of my couch, the motion effortless, familiar, like she had done it 100 times before. Like this wasn't the first time she had stepped over the invisible boundary between us, the one I wasn't sure I had ever truly set. I stood there, watching her, My fingers still curled around the doorknob as if keeping my grip on something solid would ground me. She turned to face me, tilting her head slightly, and then, that look. The one that made my stomach tighten, my breath come a little shorter. The one that always felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. "You took your time opening the door," she said, one brow arched, her voice carrying that low, amused lilt that made everything sound like a challenge. I swallowed, shifting my weight, suddenly aware of how tense my body felt, how the room itself seemed to shrink under the gravity of her presence. I was deciding if I should, I admitted, my voice steady, but only because I willed it to be. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but held all the same knowingness. She took a slow step forward, her gaze locked onto mine. "And what made you decide?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the hem of my sweater. A dozen answers flickered through my mind, each one a little too raw, a little too honest. So, I settled for the safest one. "Curiosity," I said simply. Anna made a soft, thoughtful sound, like she wasn't quite convinced, like she had expected something else. Maybe she had. Her lips parted, as if she was about to say something, but instead, she just watched me. And the way she did it, the way her eyes moved over my face, searching, lingering, made my pulse stutter. Because she knew. She had always known. The distance between us wasn't much, just a few steps, but when she moved closer, it felt as if the space had collapsed entirely. Heat radiated off her, and I could feel it, feel her, before she even touched me. My heart was hammering, my chest rising and falling too quickly, but I forced myself to stay still, to hold her gaze, to not give her the satisfaction of knowing how much she unraveled me just by being near. She exhaled softly, the sound barely there, but enough to make my stomach tighten. "You think too much," she murmured, her voice lower now, her breath warm against my skin. I opened my mouth to say something, to counter, to deflect, to do anything but let her see how deeply she was getting under my skin. But the words never came, because then I felt it, a whisper of contact. Her fingers, light and deliberate, brushing against my wrist. It was nothing, and it was everything. The touch lasted a fraction of a second, so faint it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. I knew it. She knew it. My breath caught, my body going still in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with something far more dangerous. Because that touch, it wasn't playful. It wasn't teasing. It was a question, one I didn't know how to answer. And that's when I realized this wasn't a game. The tension between us thickened, electric and nearly suffocating, stretching the silence into something that felt almost unbearable. I could hear the rain against the windows, the rhythmic patter of droplets against glass, but it felt distant now, like background noise in a scene that demanded all my attention. My pulse was erratic, hammering in my ears, and I became acutely aware of every inch of space between us, of the way Anna's presence filled the room as if she had been there all along, waiting for me to notice.
I wanted to say something.
Anything. A joke, a casual remark, something to break whatever this was before it broke me. But the words tangled in my throat, refusing to come. And then, just as I thought I might be able to force something out, Anna spoke first. "Should I leave?" The question was soft, but the weight behind it was anything but. And it wasn't real. Not truly. The way she said it, the way her voice curled around the words like they were meant to lure rather than retreat, it wasn't an offer to go. It was a test. A challenge wrapped in careful hesitation, in the slight tilt of her head, in the way her fingers flexed subtly at her sides like she was restraining herself from reaching for me. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I allowed myself to see what had been there all along.
She didn't want to go.
And if I was honest, really, truly honest, neither did I. But saying it out loud meant something more. It meant acknowledging the thing I had spent so long trying to outrun. It meant stepping over a line I wasn't sure I could ever come back from. And yet, when I finally spoke, the answer came before I could second-guess it. No. The word was barely more than a breath, fragile and uncertain, but it was there.
Spoken.
Real. Anna's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable at first, but then she nodded. Slow, deliberate. Like she had expected my answer. Like she had never doubted it at all. And then she moved. Her fingers found mine without hesitation, slipping between them with the kind of ease that made me wonder if she had always meant to do it. If this was where we had been heading from the very beginning. Her touch was warm,
Steady.
but it sent a shiver through me like I had been set on fire. I stared at our hands, at the way our fingers intertwined so naturally, like they had done this a million times before. But they hadn't. We hadn't. I could feel my breath hitching, my chest rising and falling too quickly. She felt it too. I knew because her grip tightened, grounding me, keeping me from pulling away like I always did. Like she knew I might. You always run, Anna murmured, her voice so quiet it barely reached past the space between us. But tonight, I need to know. She exhaled, her fingers pressing into my palm. If I don't step back, will you? The question sent something sharp and unfamiliar through me. Because the truth was I always did. I always found a way out. Found an excuse, a reason, a distraction. I built walls with such precision that I had almost convinced myself they were meant to be there. But Anna was standing in front of me now, waiting. Not demanding. Not forcing. Just waiting. And suddenly, all the carefully constructed reasons, all the excuses I had once held on to, felt irrelevant. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my pulse erratic. 1,000 answers clawed their way to the surface, each one carrying fear, uncertainty, hesitation. But in the end, only one won. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I didn't run. That night, everything changed. It was gradual at first, so slow it could have been mistaken for hesitation, for restraint. But it wasn't. It was something deeper, something that neither of us had dared to name before this moment. The space between us disappeared, swallowed whole by the weight of everything that had been building, simmering beneath the surface for far too long. The touches, once fleeting and uncertain, became bolder, deliberate. A brush of fingers along my jaw, a hand ghosting over my hip. Every inch of my skin burned under her touch, as if she was unraveling me with nothing more than the heat of her palm against my body. The way Anna looked at me was different now. It wasn't teasing, wasn't testing. There was no more space for games, no more walls left between us. Her gaze was steady, pulling me in, making it impossible to look away. And God, I didn't want to. Her eyes, those deep, unreadable gray eyes, held me there, trapping me in something I had spent too long pretending I could ignore. The air grew thick, charged with something neither of us tried to fight anymore. Words became unnecessary. They had never been enough for this, not for whatever this was. We had spent months tiptoeing around it, letting it slip between the cracks of stolen glances and almosts. But not now. Not here. When Anna leaned in, when her lips hovered just close enough that I could feel her breath against my skin, I knew there was no going back. I didn't want to go back. And when we kissed, the world fell away. It was slow at first, like the moment before a storm, a quiet, trembling kind of inevitability. Her lips were warm, soft, tasting faintly of the wine we had shared, of something richer, something I had no name for. My hands found their way into her hair, fingers threading through the loose strands, pulling her closer, needing her closer. And she let me. She met me with the same urgency, the same hunger, as if she had been waiting just as long, holding herself back until neither of us could anymore. The city outside blurred into nothing. The rain, the distant hum of traffic, the world beyond these walls. It didn't exist. There was only this, only her, only the way our bodies moved together as if they had always known how. The night unfolded around us, slow and deep, until time itself lost meaning. The sheets tangled beneath us, cool against our fevered skin. Every touch was deliberate, every breath shared between us. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was precise, like she had always known exactly where to touch, exactly how to pull me apart piece by piece, until I was bare in a way that had nothing to do with being undressed. And it wasn't just desire. It wasn't just the way her hands knew every curve of my body by instinct, the way our limbs tangled effortlessly. It was the way she looked at me in the quiet moments, when the urgency faded and all that was left was the weight of what we had done, of what it meant. It was the way she traced patterns along my skin, absent-minded, almost tender. The way she exhaled against my collarbone, her breath uneven, as if she was just as wrecked by this as I was. And when I whispered her name into the stillness, she answered in a way that made me forget who I had been before this moment. Somewhere between night and morning, between kisses that slowed into something languid and lazy, between fingers tracing over skin as if memorizing every inch, I knew. This wasn't fleeting. This wasn't something I could brush aside, something I could pretend hadn't shattered every carefully built certainty I had about myself. This had been coming for so long, creeping into the spaces between my ribs, planting itself deep before I had even noticed. Anna had always been leading me here, to this moment,
To her.
The sun broke over the horizon, pale light spilling through the window, stretching shadows across the walls. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the air damp and thick with the scent of the storm that had passed. The sheets were tangled, half slipping from the bed, and somewhere in the haze between sleep and wakefulness, I became aware of the steady rise and fall of Anna's breath. She was still here. Her body was relaxed, one arm draped over my waist, her face turned toward me, peaceful in sleep. Strands of blonde hair had fallen across her cheek, and without thinking, I reached out, brushing them aside with the lightest touch. I should have felt restless. I should have felt different, like I needed to retreat, to pull back into the version of myself that had spent so long pretending this wasn't inevitable. But I didn't. I laid there, still, breathing her in, and I knew I wasn't the same anymore.